Welcome back. My name is Chris, and in this video, I want to walk you through NetSuite pricing, specifically how much the software costs. I've talked about this a little bit in a separate video, and I'll have a link for it down below where I walk through some strategies for approaching the purchase of NetSuite and how to negotiate the best deal for that. But I didn't get into exact numbers whatsoever, and there's still a lot of the mechanics of the pricing for NetSuite that are often obscured or kept out of the public eye. So this might be one of the most controversial videos that I've ever made because I'm going to be kind of pulling back the curtain and showing you certain documents and grids that are generally not shown to the public, and they're just not information that is broadly available. So I want to make this kind of pretty complex subject. I want to demystify it and make it accessible and understandable by people who are actually looking to purchase NetSuite. So that is the objective of what we're going to do here. And before we get into the actual pricing structure itself, I do want to make 3 disclaimers in general about NetSuite pricing. First off, it is very confusing. Some elements are just due to the way that it's structured. Some elements I think are deliberate to make it confusing. So it's harder for customers and clients to understand what they're buying and how they could potentially take a cheaper option. And honestly, when it comes to the way that the pricing works, it's so complex that honestly, even people who sell NetSuite on a daily basis, when you talk to these people, and I've talked to many of them, and you ask them questions, well, what happens if you do this with this? They honestly don't even know because it can be very convoluted. There's lots of little rules that I'm not even going to cover in this particular video. I'm going to talk more broad strokes about the general idea of how this works and show you specific numbers, but it is a subject that is not only quite complex, but it also brings me to the second topic, which is that it changes constantly. So these things, honestly, every year, they're changing the way they price things. Sometimes it's major changes, sometimes it's small changes, but it's not just the numbers that are going to be changing, but also the way that they group things, the way that they organize or delineate their pricing model changes very frequently, as well as the terminology that you use. So that's often why you'll even find amongst sales reps, they'll go, I don't totally know what this one's called, or I don't remember how many users that is, just because from one year to the next, it could change completely. So also keep that in mind as this video gains in age. So I'm making this in 2026, but if you're watching it in 2028, there's definitely going to be elements of what I show you here that will be a little bit different. Hopefully the general concept still gets you closer to home, but do understand that some of these things are subject to change, and they very frequently do so. The third disclaimer I want to make is that there are no hard and fast rules. I'm going to be walking you through a grid showing you a lot of numbers. I'm going to walk you through a pricing calculator that shows you how things break down, but don't take this as, well, this is my exact circumstance, so based on what you showed me, this is the exact number I'm going to get. There are a lot of additional, very subtle factors that can come in, oftentimes to increase the price, but sometimes also to decrease the price. Also, a lot of things can be negotiated, so don't take this as if it's written on a grid, that's the exact price. So many of these things can be flexible. In addition to just changing from year to year, they can change depending on who you're talking to and what negotiations occur. So please keep that in mind. Take everything I'm telling you in this video with a grain of salt. So with that in mind, let's first approach this by just kind of reiterating some of the things that I talked about in my other pricing video, but also fleshing it out a little bit to understand what even goes into pricing and how do you approach that. So to do that, I actually want to go to a graphic that I've made. And the reason I made this graphic is because I haven't come across something from officially Oracle NetSuite that really gives you a clean concept of the various things that are going to be added to the price that you're paying for your NetSuite licensing. So what we're looking at here is the first thing we're going to add is the base license. This has many different things it's referred to as. Sometimes it's called the core license, the base or the core module. I'll often refer to it as the SKU or the stock keeping unit. So if we get a specific kind of package, I'll call it the services SKU. And really what this is it's kind of the core software that you're running on your system. So when you're getting NetSuite, this is the main ERP element that additional features will be added onto. The best analogy that I like to refer to is if you're buying a computer or even a car, oftentimes you'll buy a base model and then you'll have many additional options to choose from. So if you're buying a BMW, do you want cloth seats or do you want leather seats? Do you want different types of tires or rims or a dashboard display that's a much wider screen? You've got so many different additional features to choose from depending on the base model that you got. So right now what we're looking at is just the base model. So base model, base product that you're getting before you add on additional features, that is the first element that you need to think with. And to give you an example of some of the base licenses that you could have in NetSuite, there's things like the financials. That's kind of like the bare minimum, just the core ERP and financial features. You also have things like services. There's food and beverage. There's health and beauty. That's if you're selling cosmetic products. You might be selling products like a mouse or a water bottle canteen. That would be another module or base license. And then there's specific ones for things like if you're a media company or a nonprofit, or they've even added one specifically for the healthcare industry and the hospitality industry. Every single one of these things is a base model that you can purchase. And it tends to be the most expensive thing that you're going to get. Now, once you have that base model, before we even get into the additional features, there's a tier system for the base license that you get. So let's give an example here that we're gonna kind of use throughout this full video. Let's assume that we are an HVAC repair company. So we go out, we have technicians that repair AC units, maybe on college campuses or in big commercial buildings, and that's what we do. So we've got maybe 50 or 100 different service technicians. They go out, they repair these things. So if we're gonna be buying NetSuite, we're probably gonna be looking at a base license of the services SKU. And I'm specifically going to show you what that looks like in a second in terms of the features included in it, as well as the exact price for that. So let's assume that's what we're getting. And we've got, again, maybe 50 or 100 technicians, but we only have so many employees that are actually going to be in the system. So we're going to come back to these concepts in a second, but now let's go to the next major concept when it comes to our base license, which is the concept of the tiers. So there are 3 tiers that you deal with when you're getting a base license, whether it's for food and beverage, services, anything. And they changed the terminology of these all the time. Just a couple years ago, they had completely different terminology. So previously, it used to be known as the lowest level tier was limited. It was also called entry sometimes. Then you'd have the mid-market tier, and then the top one was called enterprise. More recently, they've changed it so it's called starter, standard, and premium. That honestly could change in a year or two. They're very, very flexible on these terms. And honestly, they still use the old terms all the time. The main thing you just need to understand is that there's 3 tiers. There's a low one, a medium one, and a high one. And the tiers have 2 elements to them. So let's kind of try to understand what's going on here. When you're talking about NetSuite, you've got really an amalgamation. In other words, a lot of different features that can be used. So you have features that allow you to make transactions. You have features for payroll. You have ones for fixed asset management or handling inventory or generating expense reports and balance sheets. And all of these are just separate features in the system. And there's hundreds and hundreds of different features. So what they do is when they're making a base license like services, they basically look at all these features and go, okay, we're going to take these 8 features, we're going to put them all together, and we're going to call this our services SKU. And when we make one for health and beauty, we're going to grab these 9 different features and we're going to bundle those all together and say that's the health and beauty SKU. So the first aspect of tiers is kind of a deeper level of how many features are being added. So let's say at the starter tier, the lowest one, there's 7 different features that have been added in that one. And let's say if you go up one level to the standard tier, maybe it's 8 or 9 features. So they basically grabbed 2 additional ones and said, great, we're going to include this in our standard tier. And then the premium tier might have an additional 1 or 2 features that are tacked on. So that's one aspect of the tiers. As you go up the tiers, it obviously costs more and you're going to get more functionality out of that system. The second aspect of the tiers is the user count. And you have to understand here, we're not talking about how many users you're buying. We're going to talk about that later in this video. We're talking about how many users, or what is the threshold of users that the system for that tier will allow. So you're going to see, I'll even show you a breakdown of them, but at the lowest level, that allows you up to 50 users in the system. From there, it goes 50 to 500, and from 500 up to 1,000. And those numbers change sometimes. You know, a couple years ago, it used to be pretty dramatically different thresholds. The point is that if you looked at, let's say, the services product and you say, okay, I know I want services, but what tier do I want? Well, when I look at that starter lower tier, that's actually everything I want. I don't want anything higher than that. So you might say, great, that's perfect for me. But if you know you're going to have 60 users in the system, well, you've crossed that threshold and they're going to say, listen, you can't buy that unless you're willing to sacrifice 10 users. You're not going to be able to use that tier for the number of users you're going to have. You're going to be forced to move into the standard tier. So that's another thing you should think with. The tiers can affect both the amount of features that you get as well as how many employees they're going to allow you to have in the system. And this is all in relation just to the base license. So again, in our analogy of buying a car, let's say we're buying a BMW. If we buy a 5 Series BMW, well, we still have kind of the base model or the luxury edition, etc. You've got these tiers with them. Now we move out to what are all the additional features that lie either in the system or potentially even outside the system with other products and platforms. I'll talk about that a little more in a second. But you have all these additional features that can then be added on to what you're getting with the base model. So if it's the example of the car, it's like, okay, you buy the 5 Series BMW with, you know, the luxury edition of that, but what kind of tires do you want exactly? Do you want to get the base tires? Do you want the ones that are great for all terrain? That's a perfect example of what are we adding on to our NetSuite system. And let's keep with the example of we're an HVAC repair company. So we're going to get the services base model, but in the process of doing servicing of people's air conditioning units, we also sometimes sell them additional little modules or features that can be used with their HVAC system, or maybe we have parts that we utilize when we're doing the repairs. And so all of that needs to be contained within our system. So we need inventory management, which is not included with the base services SKU. It just doesn't come with that. No matter what tier you get, you're going to need to purchase inventory management. So that's going to be an additional feature that we want. And for inventory management, or really for any feature that you're adding on, sometimes it's just one feature, and you'll see as we walk through it, there'll be some where it's just one option, and sometimes there will be a tier system within that feature. So for inventory management, for example, there is a mid-level tier and there's a premium tier. So just keep that in mind. And again, they always just have a higher price and then a bit more functionality, depending on whether you're getting a lower or a higher level tier. So for us, we would want inventory management for sure. We probably have a fleet of vans that our technicians use to drive out to various locations. So we're gonna want fixed asset management so that we can depreciate these assets. And we might have many other assets that we want included in that. So FAM, fixed asset management, that is another module that doesn't necessarily come with the service SKU that we would want to have added on for our company. Also looking at it, now there could be a lot of other features we want. Off the top of my head, projects is probably one we'd want to take advantage of. There's also the field service management product, also known as FSM. I'll talk about all these. I'll even show them to you in our grid, kind of showing all the price breakdowns. But the concept is that we've got our services SKU and we know we have a few additional features that we want to add on. A sandbox is another perfect example of, do we want to be able to have a test environment where we can make sure that customizations and integrations are going to work appropriately? Well, great. That's an additional thing that we have to pay for. So those are the add-on features that are really in the system. Then there are additional services. So again, with our car analogy, very common, you can buy a BMW and you can extend the warranty for a certain amount of time. That's a service. Or you might buy a service that allows you to bring your BMW to the dealership 2 or 3 times a year, or maybe every 10,000 miles, and they'll do a free oil change and other checkups, tunings, etc. So these are all just additional services. They're not necessarily software functions, but services from the company that can be added on. Now, from a services standpoint, you're generally talking about things like support, and there are many different types of support in NetSuite. You have everything from kind of low-level support to what's called premium support, which is really actually in the middle of the pack in terms of quality and what's covered in that. Premium support is something I definitely generally recommend for clients. And then there's upper levels like advanced customer support, also known as ACS. That is a product I've made videos on. That's generally one I do not recommend, but there's many different options there. This is not a video on support. So that would be something you can also tack on. And then lastly, in addition to that, you have just the straight up number of users that are going to be in the system. And we're going to be talking about that at a few different points in this video. The simplicity of users, because it can get complicated, but I think it can be kept relatively simple by just saying there's 3 basic categories of users. And again, when I say users, I mean people who are actually going to be going into the system, also known as seats in the system. So the first category, which you could consider the lowest, is just an employee seat. So this is someone who can access the employee center. They can do things like put in purchase requisitions, potentially depending on what you give them access to. They might have expense reports that they can upload, and oftentimes they'll be logging hours or doing some kind of time tracking. So that is the employee center. It's a very cheap access point. But usually what you're dealing with is just called a general access user. Those are just normal guys going into the system, and they might be your accounts payable team. They might be in your supply chain. They might be in operations, manufacturing. It really doesn't matter. Just your normal user in the system. Even if they're in the system all the time, these are just general users in the system, and they come at a price of $125 per user per month. And I'll show you those figures a little bit more later on. Then a level up from that is you have kind of specialized users. And there's quite a few of those, and it's really not important to talk about all of them, but an example of one would be someone, if you do have the field service management, so we've got technicians that are going out and they need to log their hours and all these details about their repair job into the system. Well, they're not just doing it straight in NetSuite, they might need to use the FSM system, and that comes at a different price per user per month. So just keep that in mind. So the simplicity is you've got your base model, you're adding on additional features that you need, you then add on additional services as you need it. Some people are not going to add on any additional services. And then you have your users, the number of users actually in the system that you need to take advantage of at the various tiers. Most commonly the main general access tier, and then maybe some employee access. So that's the basic concept. Now let's take a look at an example, especially one relevant to what I've been saying with our HVAC repair company, to get a little bit of a concept of now what is included and what would we want to be accessing. So let's open up another graphic here. All right, so here we are in a grid, and this is something that is not my creation. This is made by Oracle NetSuite themselves, and I believe it's something they hand out to prospective clients. So you could say it's broadly publicly available as opposed to the document I'm about to show you, which is definitely not openly available. So there's quite a few different things going on here. Honestly, there's just one column I want to focus on. And you'll get a concept. When we walk through one column, you'll kind of understand how this whole thing works. This is a grid for specifically the US and Canada, because the prices change depending on where you are. So this is for US dollars, let's say, and we're operating out of the United States. And what we're looking at here, we're going to focus on this one column, services standard. So remember that base model that we're getting is the services SKU, okay? And we're going to get it for the tier of standard. So let's say we even only have maybe 25 users that are going to end up in the system. We needed the functionality that's included in the standard tier, not in the starter tier. So we had to go with standard even though we don't have that many users. So this is what we're going to stick with. And let's walk through the column and just understand what is included in this. And there are, just as a disclaimer, there's a couple rows that I've kind of blacked out just because it's providing some information in terms of like ID codes and just things that I think are going to be more confusing than helpful. So I eliminated those, and we're just going to focus on what's important. So if we are an HVAC company, we're looking at buying the services standard. Now, this is so far not talking about how much it's going to cost for additional add-ons, but the base price for that SKU is $3,300 per month. US dollars. Down from that, it gives us a concept of what's included in that SKU. So we can understand, well, what are we getting out of that and what are we going to have to buy separately? So first off, it will give us the core ERP and the CRM functionality of NetSuite. That's great. Also, you're going to see a little bit lower down, we do get the core financial functionality, which is vital. And any SKU that you end up getting is also going to include the core ERP and the core finances for sure. Those are always included. Down from that, we have subsidiary management. So if, even though we're operating in the United States, if let's say we had 5 subsidiaries, we can absolutely have those multiple subsidiaries, and that's totally fine. That is included in this package. But down from that, we don't have one world. So if we had a need for multi-currency, multi-language, multi-tax, any of that kind of stuff, that's all you need one world for that. So in this particular case, so far I've said, well, we're just in the United States, even though we have multiple subsidiaries, they're all using US dollars as a base price. That would be totally fine. If we did have a Canadian subsidiary, well, then we would need to move over to the premium tier for the services SKU, which would give us one world. It would also give us, you can see it says one world additional currency. When you get one world, just buying the base one world, it will give you one additional currency. So let's say base currency is US dollars, you would also get Canadian. You wouldn't have to pay extra for that. If you then wanted to add an additional subsidiary in Mexico, which is using Mexican pesos as the base currency, at that point you would need to now pay for an additional currency on top of what you're already paying for one world. And I'll show you all those figures in just a second. But that's another scenario. Let's say we're sticking with our services standard. We're just in the United States. Moving down from that, we also get things like advanced electronic bank payments. We get Ship Central, so these are in relation to shipping inventory, things like that. Like I said, we get the financial management, like the core financial functionality. We also get some core revenue management functionality. This is also quite common. We also have Suite projects, which is great. We're definitely going to need project functionality for our HVAC repair company. And let's move down from that. We have no fixed asset management and no inventory management. So those are going to be a problem. Like I said, we need FAM. We do need inventory management for our purposes. So these are going to be things we're going to have to buy separately. And that's totally fine. I'm going to show you what those pricing are. But now we get a concept of what's even included in this package and how does it differ from, let's say, a premium package. And you can see in some of these other columns, for example, if we were a software company, you can get a concept of the difference in pricing from, let's say, services to a software company, the difference between the features that are included from a standard standpoint as opposed to premium. You can now kind of look broadly on this grid and get some more information in terms of what's occurring. This is really all I want to cover at this point on this grid. I now want to dive into another grid, which again is not generally shown to the public or clients that are looking to purchase NetSuite because it's got a lot of raw information in it. So let's jump into that now. All right, so here we are. Now this is really just an Excel grid. And what we're seeing here is we're seeing the name of the product. And sometimes these are add-on features. Sometimes these are the core base licenses that you can purchase. I'm going to show you all these things. The currency is set for US dollars. I had the option of US dollars or Canadian. You can see actually down here on the bottom left, we're on the North America tab. So if we were in EMEA, which is Europe and the Middle East and Africa, or LATAM, Latin America, Japan and the Pacific, they all have different pricing for all of them. So just understand this is all in relation specifically to USD, what I'm showing you. And so we've got our USD, we've got our monthly price, and I even added an additional column to show the annual prices. Now, before we get into the lower levels of information, I actually just want to point out something I said earlier, which is at the top here, we can see the various tiers. Remember, I said if we're buying that base license, we've got 3 different tiers. We can see these are the 3 tiers that are kind of now being referred to as, and then the things that are above them, these legacy ones, if you go back to, let's say 2025, this is what used to be referred to. And if you go back even earlier than that, they had a different terminology. And the funny thing is that all of these different terminologies over the years, they still constantly get used, not just by people who are kind of familiar with them, but also, as you'll see in this grid, which is the official most up-to-date pricing grid from Oracle NetSuite, you're going to see they still have all of their old terminology peppered constantly throughout this thing. So that's the basic concept. On the right here, you can see for the current tiers, what is the employee breakdown. So this is the threshold. If you've got less than 50 employees, then you may be able to get with that starter tier. And then if you've got 50 to 500, they're going to force you to the standard one. Above 500, they're going to force you to the premium tier. And if you're over 1,000 employees, which is not very common for NetSuite, but if you do, there's an additional level you can actually purchase specifically for that. So we've got hundreds of different products and SKUs available here. I'm going to walk through a handful. I even highlighted them separately so we can just kind of highlight in on them. ones that I think are either relevant to an enormous amount of clients or is specifically relevant to the example I'm providing of our HVAC repair company. And I'm starting at the bottom because you'll see I think it's a little more relevant at the bottom, and then we're going to move up. So we're going to move up here. Now, this section that we're in right now, these are all the main base licensees. A lot of these things I just described to you. So we have things like a products license. You can see that here. We have the services license that obviously we're going to be taking. And the services license, you can see it's that $3,300 per month. Okay, we also have things like social impact. These are some more niche licenses that can be purchased. You've got software, you've got social impact. If you're a publishing company, there's media companies. You can see that here. You've got, if you're in the hospitality industry, there's a healthcare one. You can see that's a newer one they came out with that it really conforms to a lot of the healthcare regulations, which are very stringent. So that's a good one that recently came out. And then, like I said, there's health and beauty, there's food and beverage. These are all very commonly purchased SKUs. Financials, this used to be called financials first. They now just call it financials. That's kind of like your base model. And as you can see here, we've got prices, and this is per year now. We've got prices like for the base level, you can have about $23,000 a year. You might have $32,000, $42,000. For our services, it comes out to about $40,000. Now, before you have a heart attack and go, whoa, these prices are out of control. Look, we haven't even added on our features, and we're already looking at $40,000 per year. Take a breather. There is an additional element, which I'm really going to talk about more a little bit later in this video, but keep in mind that it's very uncommon to purchase NetSuite without some kind of a discount. And I'm not talking about a 5 or 10% discount. Many clients are getting 40, 50% discounts. Well, that's half off. So if you're looking at something like your base license is going to cost $40,000, well, that might end up being $20,000 for you. So just keep that in mind. Don't immediately freak out some of these prices here. You'll see we're going to get to a price calculator. I have that right here. We're going to walk through all the things we're adding along with the base price, the users, additional things that we're going to tack onto this, and we'll come out to, with the discount, what is, I would say, a realistic price that you might see when you're actually buying NetSuite. So for now, we've locked in on the base license that we're going to be getting. Now let's take a look at some of the additional features that could be added on. So we're going to scroll up on this. We're kind of coming out of the area of the base packages or modules. So suite projects, we have that here. Now this is included as a feature already on our services standard tier. So we don't need to add this one on, but if we did, then we would be taking a look at this and going, okay, great, it's $900 a month. That's good to know. It's a very valuable module to take advantage of. Scrolling up from that, I mean, you can see just an enormous amount of products. There's things like configure price quote, there's suite billing, inventory, manufacturing. There's so many different things that are available here. And we're going to come up to the next highlighted. So this is procurement. This is a feature that's obviously critically important for NetSuite. It's generally included in most packages like food and beverage, health and beauty. It just comes naturally with this. However, if you did buy a very, very bare bones base package, you would almost always want to be adding on something like procurement to that. The same usually goes with also CRM. It's generally included, but if it's not, you're going to want to buy it separately for sure. And then moving up from that, we get to kind of the one world information. So like I said, if we need something like multi-currency, multi-tax, we're going to be adding the first off, one world in the beginning, which comes with one free currency. And then, so you can see that's about $24,000 a year. And then if we knew we had, let's say, in addition to our base currency, we needed 4 additional currencies, well, one's going to be free, but the other 3, we're going to have to pay $10,000 per currency. So if you are a very international organization, it can increase the licensing price for sure. Up from that, we've got, if you are in the manufacturing world, you've got products that you're going to be making. You have things like just your kind of base manufacturing module, which is not cheap. It definitely is it comes with a lot of functionality. So it also comes with a price tag. And if you are doing some more complex manufacturing requirements, like what's called WIP and routing, which is work in process, that comes with an additional cost, which you can see here. And there's even an advanced manufacturing module, which you're going to see up above. So these are some additional ones you can take a look at. Now, inventory management, that is definitely one we're going to want to add in. So I would take a look at that and say, great, that's going to be $599 a month. Moving up from that, we have fixed asset management. That's another one that's critical for us. So we're also going to be adding that on. Now, field service management, given the circumstance I gave, we probably want a field service management add-on. But let's say for the sake of this that maybe we have another external third-party software that we use to handle our technicians in the field, or maybe we just handle them on the phone and we actually don't need software to keep track of all that. For whatever reason, I'm not going to be adding FSM onto us purchasing our NetSuite license, even though you're going to see it right here. We've got FSM right here, so you can see those prices. Moving up from that, we have, if I come way up here, I put Analytics Warehouse in here. This is just a category of product that I wanted to point out. Things like NetSuite Analytics Warehouse, which is also kind of abbreviated to NSAW. There's also Planning and Budgeting, or Suite Projects Pro, which used to be known as Open Air. These are all examples of products that are pitched and marketed as NetSuite products. And I've commented on this in many previous videos, but these are not actually NetSuite products. These are Oracle products, fully designed by Oracle. They exist in the Oracle infrastructure, and they are separate from NetSuite. So as opposed to almost everything else you're going to see on this list, which is inside of NetSuite, if you're going with something like Analytics Warehouse, and I'm not knocking it, I'm not saying it's bad at all, I'm just pointing out that this is a separate platform and software that's going to be integrated in with NetSuite. So just keep that in mind. Up from that, we have advanced manufacturing. So I pointed out earlier, we have normal manufacturing, we have WIP and routing, and this is advanced manufacturing with even additional features and services. And while I haven't pointed this out yet, on many of these particular SKUs that I've been pointing out, there's a mid-market and then a premium and sometimes a starter tier for those additional features. Moving up from that, we have some of the support and services features. So you can see here, these are a lot of, pointed out, advanced customer support, also known as ACS. So we have a few ACS options here. For example, Advise is kind of like the lowest level for ACS. Optimize is in the middle range. Architect is really at the top. And you can kind of see the price spread for that can be significant. As cheap as $12,000, as much as getting close to $200,000, depending on what you're getting for that. I do have a separate video on ACS, so if you're curious about that, you can absolutely check it out. Over from this, this would be another what I would consider a service, is called Learning Cloud Support, also known as LCS, and you may be aware of it as Oracle MyLearn. It's basically where you go in and you can take advantage of Oracle's videos, courses, and documentation on how to use the system. And they have thousands and thousands of documents. So this is obviously something that's a bit of a competitor for me, or I should say I'm a competitor to LCS to the degree that I have courses that teach NetSuite. And I'm not going to comment on the quality of this. Let's just talk for a second about like what you're buying with this. So right now I'm selecting the standard tier as opposed to starter or premium. What you're buying with LCS, and you're going to see this in a second, it's a little bit detached from what you're going to normally pay for your users. So if you have 25 users in the system and you buy LCS, well, that doesn't mean all 25 users get LCS. There's separate pricing for how many users you want to have access to all the LCS training materials. And I'll be honest, I actually don't know the exact calculation. So you can see here, the price for the company pass for LCS standard is about $5,000 per year. I think that gives you several users. I don't remember the exact number, and I asked a few people who sell NetSuite all day long, and they actually didn't know as well. So I don't know for sure how many users it includes. It potentially doesn't even include any users. I just don't know for sure. You'd have to ask an actual representative to give you a quote on that. And the basic concept, though, is you're paying for LCS. If you need a lot of users, as you're going to see in a second, you are going to have to pay for them separately. So that's just something to keep in mind. And that's really all I want to show you in terms of the specific pricing. I feel like we've covered quite a bit in that. Let's now walk through everything we know. Let's do it through the calculator and see how much is this actually going to cost us based on our HVAC repair company example. So for that, I'm going to come over to the calculator. And it's not flashy, it's just a really simple Excel template that salespeople can use to figure out the base pricing and what we're talking about. So in this case, we're getting our services standard tier. So that's the 3,300 basically that we talked about. And remember, we need projects, inventory management, and FAM, but projects is included. So we're only gonna pay 600 for each of the additional add-ons, and that comes out to about 4,500 per month. US dollars. So then down from that on the calculator, we get into the users, which is a totally separate calculation. So even though the tier is at standard, that's just the threshold of how many could be. Now we need to figure out how many are we actually getting. And it defaults to 10, let's say more realistically, based on the size of our company, we need 25 users in the system, not the employee users, those are much cheaper, but the people that are actually gonna be in the system doing something. And for 25, it comes at a rate of $125 per user. So that's gonna be about $3,000 per month just for the user licenses. Down from that, we have the entire LCS section. It defaults to 5 LCS users. Again, just because I'm not totally sure how many come if you just buy the package and how that actually breaks down, let's just leave it as blank. And I mean, honestly, I generally don't recommend people get LCS unless they need it. Another thing to keep in mind with LCS is that it's often heavily discounted when it's sold as part of a full package. Sometimes it's even given away for free. So if you can get LCS at a really discounted price or even just get it for free, I mean, you might as well take advantage of it. It's not a terrible product. It's just not, in my opinion, as good as it could be. And a rate of $335 per user, it's nothing to shrug at. So for our example, let's just say we're not going to be adding any LCS users. Notice I didn't also include LCS up above. So right now we're just assuming no LCS. Down from that, we have 2 additional things you should absolutely think with: the sandbox environment and premium support. Now the sandbox environment, actually both of these, the way that they get calculated is it's 10% of whatever's been calculated up to this point. It's an immediate base price of 10% added on. So for some companies, if you're looking at, I mean, right now we're looking at $91,000. So to get a sandbox environment in this case, it would cost about $9,000. That's just going to immediately get tacked on. Obviously, a sandbox is very useful. In many instances, I would recommend clients get a sandbox environment if they know they're going to have extensive customizations, testing that needs to be done, and integrations. You're going to want to have some sort of a sandbox environment. But of course, you don't have to get it. And then similarly, premium support, this is the one I almost always recommend for clients unless they're on an extreme budget. Premium support allows you to have 24/7 support, not just email support, but also calling. And instead of just emailing, you're in the back of the line, you can call them and just figure out, hey, my system is not working. Please help me debug this. And they are pretty good at doing that. So premium support is an additional 10% that's going to get tacked on. So 10% of this 91,000 will get added on. Some people complain with premium support to the degree that they say, listen, I'm already paying for a consulting company that's providing me with support. Why would I want to pay for premium support? What you got to keep in mind with that is if you're paying some other consulting company to do your implementation and maybe even provide support after you go live, they only know what they know about NetSuite. They can't go into the underlying code and make changes or fixes to things that are actually wrong with the software itself. That's something that only Oracle NetSuite can do. So that's an example where if you've got something that's just not working because there's something wrong literally in the code itself, or it is broken, and you go to your consultant, they're like, I have no idea why this is not working. That's something that only premium support is going to be able to help you with. And if it's mission critical for your business, you're going to want to have some kind of support. You're not going to want to send in some email that gets answered 2 weeks later. So premium support is one that I would not just write off as we need to save the money and it's not worth it. That is a recommended purchase for most companies. Another thing you should keep in mind is because it's that 10%, well, in this case, we're looking at a $91,000 kind of base price, and then you're going to add in premium support. If you're looking at a lower price for your license, so maybe you're really just getting the base model and really some small add-ons, you might only be looking at maybe a $30,000 or $40,000 licensing price, and then the premium support's only going to be $4,000. So just keep that in mind. Moving down from that, let's actually add that on. So I'm going to hit 1, which tacks that on. So now we come down to the price as $110,000, which again, try not to have a heart attack. I know that seems like a high number, but now we get to the discounting element. So they've kind of defaulted, said discount of 10%. When it comes to discounting, I would say overall, again, very infrequently will clients pay the list price, just the full upfront price for NetSuite. That is very, very uncommon. 10 and 20%, I would say those are very low discounts. I would say more commonly, I see 30% discounts. You can definitely get a 40% discount. And I've seen clients that get over 60% discounts. I'm not saying that's common, I'm just saying it's possible. There are a lot of things that can influence how you can get a discount. Certainly when you're purchasing NetSuite can make a big difference, whether it's the end of a quarter or even the end of the fiscal year for Oracle, which is May 31st. That can make a major impact in terms of how willing they are to provide a discount. But there's a lot of additional features. How much are you buying in the first place? That can influence things. As you grow as a client, how valuable are you going to be to them? These are all things that can influence what discount you can get at the end of the day. Also, just how good of a negotiator are you? These are all things, and certainly, hopefully, as you do this video, and you understand really what's happening from a pricing standpoint more, hopefully that gives you even more leverage to argue and fight for the highest discount that you possibly can. And another thing to think with is if you're not buying from NetSuite directly, but you're buying through a solution provider, which is a category of consulting agency, they can purchase the NetSuite, or really they're liaising with Oracle NetSuite to help you purchase the software, so they can help you fight to get the best discount possible. So for this example, I'm going to give a number that I would say is not a low number, but it's also not an unreasonable or kind of like a pipe dream number. Let's say we get a 40% discount. So it's very, very possible for many clients that I've seen. Well, that brings the full price down now to a little over $65,000. Okay, now I'm not saying that's cheap. Certainly if you're looking at a comparison of something like Sage Intacct, you might say, listen, this is significantly more than some of the other competing ERPs that I'm looking at. That is true, but I've made many videos on why you might want to choose something like NetSuite over other products like Sage Intacct, Business Central, Odoo, etc. Some of these much cheaper options that you have on the table. There's a lot that NetSuite brings to the table that you cannot get with some of these alternatives. So please keep that in mind. And again, these are not hard and fast rules. This is not the number that you're going to get if you're an HVAC repair company that needs 25 users. A lot of other things could play into this that could affect how this number comes out in the end. And also, when you're buying the NetSuite software, you got to keep in mind there's so many other things you need to think with when you are negotiating that contract. There's price caps, there's price locks, there's renewals, there's the number of years that your contract's going to cover, in addition to any discounts that you secure. If you don't know what any of these things are, check out my other NetSuite pricing video. I talk about all these things. I talk about how to negotiate for them. That is a vital video if you know you're going to be going into the pricing negotiation with either NetSuite directly or via a solution provider. So that's for another day, but just understand for now, these gives you at least some raw numbers that you can think with. All right, so that is a detailed look at pricing and also how you might be able to calculate how you're going to be priced for NetSuite. But there's an entire additional element that we haven't covered at all, which is the implementation costs. We've only been referencing the licensing costs per year, but what is that implementation going to look like? And I have many videos where I talk about implementations, how long they tend to take, how to choose partners, all of these different things. So let's talk about this a little bit more broadly. When it comes to the literal pricing for partners, many of them in the sphere of alliance partners and solution providers, which is generally what I recommend you go with, as opposed to, some independent consultant living in Phoenix, Arizona, or like a team that's operating out of the Philippines or India. They definitely tend to be riskier if you're going with those, despite the fact that they tend to be much cheaper. If you're looking for, again, an established alliance partner or solution provider, which doesn't always mean a big company. It could be 1,000 consultants. It could be 5 guys operating out of Montreal, but they are an official partner. The pricing for these guys, there's a little bit of a spread, but honestly, they tend to average around, let's say, $200 an hour, US dollars. So just think with that in terms of general pricing, that's pretty common. And in terms of how the overall cost of an implementation will go in relation to your licensing, now, there are many different things that can influence it. There are circumstances where you could absolutely have an extremely expensive licensing, like $150,000, $200,000 licensing, and then for whatever reason, you actually have a pretty cheap implementation or relatively cheap implementation, and you can have the reverse. You can have a very cheap initial, like $35,000, $40,000 licensing cost, and then an extremely expensive, relatively, implementation to actually go live. So there's some variation, but in general, I would say the average I've seen is what I would consider 1.5 or maybe 2 to 1. So what I mean by that is in the example we gave, we had a $65,000 annual licensing cost for NetSuite and all the premium support and the sandbox and all the stuff that went along with that. Well, if we multiply that by 2, we're looking at about 120, maybe 130 on average, thousand for the implementation. That's probably what we're going to be looking at on average. Okay. But there's thresholds, right? You could go, I would say the lowest threshold I've really seen is maybe 1-to-1. So $65,000 licensing fee, $65,000 implementation cost. Again, assuming we're not talking about super cheap consultants out of some foreign country or, one guy that's operating out of his basement. Generally, that's what we're going to look at as the lowest cost. And then on the upper range, it's almost unlimited. I mean, it depends how crazy you can get. But the highest I've tended to see is, let's say, a 5-to-1. So if it's a $100,000 licensing cost, you might be looking at $500,000 for the implementation at the end of the day. So the question is, what really determines where you're going to fall on that scale? From 1-to-1 all the way up to 5-to-1, if the average more like 2-to-1, how do you know where you're going to fall? It comes down to many different factors. There's definitely things like how many customizations are you going to want? Do you have a really unique business that really has to build that into the software? Do you know you're going to need a lot of suite script development or workflows or integrations that you need to plug in and bolt onto your NetSuite system? Those are definitely going to increase the cost. But the number one factor by far is data. How much data do you have? How clean or optimal is that data? How much data do you want to bring into the system? These things influence the overall implementation cost the most by far. Like nothing even comes close to it. So do you have really dirty data that really needs a lot of cleanup? Some of that's going to be handled by your team, but some of it's going to be handled by the consultants. That's really going to rack up the price. Are you going to do a clean cut where you've got everything in QuickBooks and you're just going to start straight off with NetSuite? You're not going to have any historical information in the system? Or do you want to look at it and say, listen, based on the industry that we're in, maybe we have government regulations we have to comply with, or medical and HIPAA. We need 4 years of financial records, transactional records. We've just doubled or maybe even tripled your implementation costs just by having to bring over all that data. Also, how much data do you have, right? All of these things will influence the time and the money that's going to be spent getting you onto the system. So you really need to think with those. Take an honest look at what you've got, how many customers, how many vendors, items, transactional records, all of this stuff, and really tell yourself honestly, where do you think you probably fall in that scale of 1-to-1, 2-to-1, 3-to-1, etc. And then again, using the calculator and the grids I showed you earlier in this video, you can probably get close to the mark in terms of how much you think that licensing cost is going to be, and then use that to factor in what the end implementation is going to be. Now, obviously, that's going to change a lot depending on the circumstances and so many different factors, both on the licensing cost side as well as on the implementation. But I'm trying to give you some rules of thumb and guide rails so that if someone quotes you at $30,000 for an implementation, you might look at that and go, listen, that seems entirely impractical based on what I've seen. And if someone's quoting you for maybe $400,000, you might look at the circumstances and say, I think I'm going to look for other quotes because this seems like you're pricing me way too high. Hopefully you've watched this video before it gets taken down. I have a feeling this is going to annoy people that, again, most of this is not public information. I'm sure this is going to annoy certain people. So hopefully I can keep it up as long as I can and get people to actually have a demystified, explained, clear concept of what they're looking at from a pricing standpoint. And again, I have another video that gives you tactics on how to negotiate your license and contract. So definitely check out that video. Check out any of my other videos if you want to. And of course, if you want actual training on NetSuite and how the system works, I have almost 20 courses at this point on my website. I'll have a link for that down below. You can take advantage of any of that. So if you found this video helpful, please hit that like button. Subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. And with all that in mind, I hope to see you in the next video.